Welcome back, everyone. So you're ready to explore this whole psychology of money thing, huh? You sent over some really interesting notes and excerpts from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. Let's do a deep dive.
Great pick. This book, it really gets you thinking differently about wealth and success.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
Housel's main point is that success with money, well, it's not about being some math genius. It's more about mastering your mindset, like how you think about money. He calls it the psychology of money, right? You could have like a super high financial IQ, but still struggle if you don't get how your mind works with money.
Yeah. And it's wild how much our past experiences just shape our financial outlook. How he makes this point that our personal money stories, even though they're just a tiny little part of the whole world's financial history, they actually make up like 80% of how we think about money.
It's so true. Like, I remember when I bought my first stock, it was back during the tech bubble. I was so excited to be in the market, and then bam, the whole thing crashed. I held on tight, but it definitely made me a little more cautious after that.
That's a perfect example. Even just one event, it can be so powerful. And that actually reminds me of what Housel says about luck and risk. They're like totally intertwined. We can't judge success with money just by how things turn out because you can't really separate skill from luck, can you?
That's a good point. We tend to, like, put successful people up on a pedestal, assuming they must be super smart, right?
Yeah.
But what if they just got lucky? Or take someone who's struggling financially. Do we just assume they made all the wrong choices? Maybe they just, I don't know, maybe they just hit a streak of bad luck.
Yeah. Housel, he uses the example of leverage to make this point.
Right.
Leverage, it can supercharge your wins, but it can also really amplify your losses. And it doesn't matter how skilled you are. You could make a brilliant investment decision, but then something unexpected happens, like a pandemic hits and wipes out all your gains.
You just never know.
Right. On the other hand, you could make a super risky bet. Maybe it wasn't even based on good logic, but it pays off big time.
So judging people based on their bank account, it doesn't tell the whole story. There's always more going on, right?
For sure. And that kind of leads us to this whole idea of never enough. You actually highlighted this in your notes, right? You had those excerpts about Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff. Both of these guys, they achieved incredible success, but in the end, they risked it all because they wanted more. It seems like even those at the very top, they still crave more.
I know, it's like they can't help themselves. What is that all about?
Well, Hustle, he thinks it's this problem of constantly moving the goalposts. It's like as we achieve more, our expectations also grow, right? So we end up on this treadmill, always chasing more, but we never stop to figure out what enough even means.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's like you get addicted to the feeling of achieving something, but then the satisfaction fades away faster and faster each time.
You got it. Housel, he actually has this formula. He says, happiness equals results minus expectations. So if our expectations are always way higher than our results, we're always going to feel kind of unhappy no matter what we achieve. We could be financially successful, but completely miss the point. Always chasing that next big thing.
Wow, that equation is powerful. Okay, so how do we break free from this trap? How do we figure out what enough actually means for us?
Well, one of the biggest things that gets in the way is comparing ourselves to others. Especially these days with all the social media, everyone's showing off their perfect life, their highlight reel, right? It just makes you feel like you got to keep up, even if it means stretching your finances way too thin.
Oh, tell me about it. It's so easy to get sucked into that.
Yeah.
You're scrolling through these perfectly curated feeds and you start to feel bad, even if you're actually doing pretty well.
It's a constant battle, but the key is to define what enough means for you, even if it's different from what everyone else is doing, what society says you should have. It means figuring out what really matters to you and making your money goals match those values.
So it's about tuning out the noise and focusing on your own path. And speaking of paths, one of the most powerful things Housel talks about is compounding, right? That whole snowball effect where small, consistent actions can lead to massive results over time.
Yeah. If you can really get that, it's a game changer. Compounding, it works exponentially, not in a straight line, and that's what trips a lot of people up. It basically means the longer you keep your money invested, the more dramatically it can grow, even if you're only putting in small amounts at the beginning.
I love how he uses those two different examples, Warren Buffett and Jim Simons, right? Buffett, he's been in the game for forever, and while his average returns each year aren't crazy high, that compounding over decades has made him, well, one of the richest people on the planet.
And here's the crazy part. Most of Buffett's wealth, it actually came after he turned 65. He's like the poster child for long-term thinking and patience.
It's incredible. And then there's Jim Simons, right? He had much higher returns each year, but he ended up with less wealth overall because he wasn't in the market as long.
Right.
It just shows you time is your best friend when it comes to investing.
Totally. And that's where I think people get it wrong. They want those quick wins, that instant gratification. But building real wealth, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
It's about shifting to that long-term perspective. And I'm thinking about that for my own investments. Maybe I need to be a little less worried about what happens in the short term and just stay focused on the long game.
That's a really good takeaway. Housel, he says that often time in the market is actually more important than trying to time the market. And he makes this interesting distinction, too, between getting wealthy and staying wealthy. You had that in your notes, too, right? He says they actually require totally different skills.
Okay, now I'm curious. So what are those different skills?
Well, to build wealth, you might need to take some risks, be bold, maybe even a little optimistic. But to keep your wealth, you need a whole different set of things. Caution, humility, and even like a healthy amount of what Housel calls paranoia.
Paranoia. That sounds a bit intense.
Yeah, well, he uses that word to highlight how important it is to avoid those big catastrophic losses. The main thing for staying wealthy, he says, is survival. You got to stay in the game long enough for compounding to do its magic. You could be an amazing investor, but if you make one huge, reckless bet and lose everything, you're out.
So it's about finding that balance, right, between risk and caution. Being willing to take some calculated risks to grow your money, but also being smart about protecting what you've already built.
That's exactly where his idea of the barbell personality comes in.
I was hoping we'd get to that. That was one of the things I found most interesting, but also kind of confusing. What does it actually mean to have a barbell personality when it comes to money?
It's a cool concept, right? Okay, so think of an actual barbell, with weights on each end. In this case, one side of that barbell, it represents being optimistic about the future, like believing in what's possible and being willing to take some risks.
Okay.
But the other side, that's where the healthy paranoia comes in. Being ready for things that could go wrong, protecting yourself from, like those really bad losses.
So it's kind of like balancing a growth mindset with a risk management mindset.
Exactly.
You're open to opportunities, but you're also cautious. I get how that would be helpful, especially with investing. You don't want to be so afraid of risk that you miss out on gains, but you also don't want to be reckless.
Yeah. It's like having a plan A and a plan B, maybe even a plan C. I remember this one time I was thinking about investing in this new tech startup. I was really excited about it. The potential was huge, but I also knew startups are risky.
So how did you use that barbell approach in that situation?
Well, on the optimistic side, I did all my research. I really believed in what the company was trying to do, and I felt good about their potential for growth. But on the paranoid side, I only invested a small amount of my portfolio, like an amount I could handle losing if things went bad.
That's smart. You were optimistic enough to take the risk, but also paranoid enough to protect yourself from a total wipeout.
You got to find that balance, right? And, speaking of risks and things you don't expect, that reminds me of another thing you had in your notes, the whole tails concept. It really makes you think differently about success and setbacks.
Okay, remind me about tails. It had something to do with rare events having a big impact, right?
Exactly. Think about a long tail.
Okay.
Those infrequent things, the extreme events, the ones way out at the tails of the distribution, those often end up causing the most significant outcomes.
You mean like those black swan events, the things no one sees coming, but then they change everything?
Yeah, exactly. Think about the dot-com bubble bursting or the financial crisis back in 2008. Those were tail events. They had this massive impact on, everything financial.
Huge.
Or even on a smaller scale, right? Think of a company that launches 10 new products. 9 of them might totally flop, but then one becomes a huge success that one can make up for all the losses and, make the company super successful.
So even if you're wrong most of the time, just a couple of big wins can change the whole game.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that those unexpected things, both the good and the bad, they can have a way bigger impact than we think.
For sure. And I think this is especially important for investing. It means you should kind of expect setbacks as part of it, right? Don't get discouraged. Just remember, a few well-timed big wins, that's what can make the real difference.
It also makes you think twice about judging someone based on where they are right now.
Yeah.
They might be struggling, but who knows? Maybe there's some tail event right around the corner that's going to change everything for them.
That's so true. It's a good reminder to stay open to possibilities and to remember we never really know the full story. And speaking of not knowing the full story, Housel also has this idea about wealth. He says, wealth is what you don't see. That's something you specifically wanted to unpack, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
I remember reading that and thinking, what does that even mean?
It's about the difference between being rich versus being wealthy.
Well,
Rich, that's about having a big income, showing off with fancy cars, taking expensive vacations.
yeah.
But wealthy, that's different. It's about what you've accumulated, your assets, your financial freedom. And that's often hidden. People don't see it.
So you can have someone who makes a ton of money, but they spend it all trying to look rich. They might look successful, but they're not truly wealthy because they haven't built that security. It's like that saying, don't judge someone's net worth by their, self-worth.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, wealth, it's often the nice cars you don't buy, the fancy trips you don't take.
It's about having the discipline to save, to invest for the future, even if it means waiting for something you want, which, let's be real, isn't always easy. There's temptation everywhere.
You're right. It takes real effort to resist those urges, to focus on what really matters long term. And that actually brings us to one of the most basic things about building wealth, saving.
Yes. In your notes, you highlighted some things about saving, like how you don't need a super high income to save effectively, and how even small amounts can really add up.
Housel, he totally debunks that myth that you got to have a huge salary to be a good saver. He says even people who earn a modest income can build wealth if saving is a priority. It's all about getting into those good habits early on and being consistent.
It's about changing your mindset, right? From I can't afford to save to how much can I save?
Exactly. And a lot of it comes down to being happy with what you have and, managing your ego. If you're always chasing the next shiny object, trying to impress other people with how much you spend, it's going to be hard to save.
I see how that connects to the enough idea. If you can be content with less, it frees up more to save, to invest in your future.
It's a powerful shift. Housel says we should think of saving as like buying future options and freedom.
I like that. It's not about depriving yourself. It's about investing in your future self.
Exactly. You're buying freedom to chase what you're passionate about, to take risks, or just to have that peace of mind knowing you've got a cushion.
So you're reframing saving from something negative, like you're denying yourself today, to something positive, creating opportunities for tomorrow.
It's about understanding that time. That's our most valuable thing. And money, it's just a tool to help us make the most of our time.
I'm starting to see how all these ideas from the book are connected.
They really do build on each other, don't they? And
Yeah.
it leads to this bigger understanding of what Housel says all through the book. The best thing about money, its real value, is that it can give you control over your time.
That's huge. You had that underlined in your notes, too. Tell me, why did that resonate with you?
Well, I think we all want a certain amount of freedom in our lives, to make our own choices. And having financial security, it gives you options. You're not stuck in a job you hate. You don't have to make decisions just based on money. You can choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, what you do with your days. That's real wealth.
But so many people do the opposite, don't they? They work these crazy hours, they sacrifice their time, their energy, all to get a bigger house, a nicer car, more stuff. And in the end, they end up owned by those things.
It's a recipe for burnout and regret. It shows how important it is to be intentional with how we spend our time and our money.
We got to align our money choices with what we truly value. Instead of getting caught up in that whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, we need to ask ourselves, is this thing I'm about to buy, is it really going to make my life better? Or am I just trying to fill some hole or impress someone?
That's such a good question. It can help us break out of that cycle of always wanting more and focus on what really brings us joy.
And it reminds me of something else Housel talks about, the allure of pessimism, and how it can mess with our thinking, especially about money.
It's so interesting how, whether we're naturally optimistic or pessimistic, that can really shape our financial decisions.
So why is pessimism so alluring, especially when it comes to money? I find myself clicking on those doom and gloom headlines, even though I know they're not always right.
Well, think about it. Pessimists, they see setbacks as permanent. But optimists, they see them as temporary. And because progress, it usually happens slowly, it's less noticeable than those sudden, dramatic, bad things.
So it's easier to focus on the negative because it gets our attention more. Like we're wired to pay more attention to threats than to good things.
Right. And when you're hit with all this negative news, all these scary predictions all the time, it creates this feeling of fear and urgency. So we might make impulsive decisions out of fear. We might sell investments at the worst time or miss out on good opportunities because we're too scared to act.
So we got to be aware of our own tendencies, right? whether we're more optimistic or pessimistic, and how that might be changing how we see things in the financial world. But how do we actually do that? How do we separate the real information from the noise and make decisions that are more, rational?
That's where what Housel says about recognizing our own biases is so important. We all need to be mindful of that, especially when it comes to money.
Okay, let's get into that. I have a feeling this is where it gets really interesting. I mean, we all have biases, right? Those mental shortcuts, they influence our decisions even when we don't realize it.
Oh, yeah, totally. And one of the biggest ones is confirmation bias. That's the tendency to look for information that backs up what we already believe, even if it's not really true.
It's like there was this one time I was so sure this certain stock was going to take off. I only read articles that said it would go up, only watched videos that agreed with me, totally ignored anything that said it might not.
Right?
And guess what? It totally tanked. I lost a bunch of money.
Classic example. We all have those blind spots, right? And with money, you really got to be aware of them.
So how do you do that? How do you, catch yourself doing it and avoid making those same mistakes?
One thing you can do is try to find opposing viewpoints. Like, if you're thinking about making an investment, really search for information that challenges what you think. Make yourself consider the other side.
So get out of that echo chamber, see things from different angles. I'm realizing how this connects back to that barbell personality idea, that healthy paranoia. Maybe it helps us question our own biases and make smarter decisions.
Yeah, I like that. Another bias Housel talks about is the illusion of control. That one's especially important when it comes to investing. It's this belief that we have way more control over what happens than we actually do.
So we think we can predict what the market's going to do or outsmart everyone else.
Exactly. We might think we've got the system figured out, that it guarantees we'll be successful. But the truth is, markets, they're complex, they're unpredictable. There's always going to be that element of chance, the unknown.
It's a reminder to stay humble, I guess, to admit that we don't know everything, that even the best investors mess up sometimes.
It's about being okay with not knowing and accepting that uncertainty is just part of it all.
That's a tough one, I think, for a lot of people, especially with their money. We want to feel in control, like we can predict and manage everything. But maybe wanting that control so much, maybe that's actually working against us.
Yeah, it can definitely lead to overconfidence, to risky behavior. We can't control everything, but we can control how we react to the things we can't control.
That's a good one. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, explored some pretty big concepts from the psychology of money. I feel like I have a whole new way of looking at how I make decisions about money.
It's amazing how much understanding the psychology behind our money choices can really help, right? It's not just about the numbers, it's about understanding ourselves and our relationship with money.
So before we wrap things up, is there anything we haven't really talked about that you think would be helpful for our listener to think about, something that builds on what we've been exploring?
One thing to consider is how all these principles of money psychology, they can actually apply to other parts of life too.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about money, it's about understanding people and making choices that lead to a good life, no matter how much money we have.
Exactly. Think about that concept of enough. We talk about how important it is to figure out what enough means for our finances. But that idea, it applies to so much more than just money, right? Our careers, our relationships, our goals, everything. Are we always striving for more, never really feeling satisfied with what we have? Or can we find that contentment, that joy in what we already have?
That's a big question. It reminds us that just chasing more doesn't always lead to happiness. Maybe real fulfillment comes from finding joy in what we already have and making choices that are aligned with our values, whether it's money, relationships, anything that matters to us.
That's such a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that real wealth, real success, it's not just about how much money you have or what you own. It's about the life you build and how you impact the world.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. It's been awesome exploring the psychology of money with you.
Likewise.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive gave you some valuable insights and maybe sparked your curiosity to keep learning about this stuff. Go back to your notes, check out other resources, and most importantly, think about how these ideas fit into your own life and your own journey with money.
And hey, be kind to yourself, enjoy the journey, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Until next time, happy diving, everyone.